receiver at the top, and so all of the radio waves that this one would collect would get concentrated to the equipment that's in the little blue box at the top, and that is the equipment that would then convert that into a form that the astronomer could study. Now, don't let the humble appearance of this little telescope fool you, because this one is super important to the history of radio astronomy, considering that this was actually the very first radio telescope that was ever built. So the story begins here. We're going back to the 1930s now. There was a fellow named Grote Reber at that time who was fresh out of college, and he was absolutely fascinated by radio waves. He loved to operate his ham radio, and he was just really kind of fascinated about the ways that radio waves could be applied here on Earth. Now, during the 1930s, there was a report published about the discovery of cosmic radio waves, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But the discovery of cosmic radio waves was completely mind-blowing, because up until the 1930s, people had no idea that there were these radio signals being created by objects in space naturally, much less that we could receive those signals here on Earth. Grote Reber decided he was going to become the first person to do that. And he went to his local hardware shop with $4,000 of his own money, and there he bought all the parts he needed to build that telescope that you see there. But that was a great day for the hardware shop. That's the equivalent of about $60,000 worth today. And he actually set that up in his mama's backyard in Wheaton, Illinois. That was in 1937. And he used it for 20 years of research. He was never hired nor funded by anybody. He just did this as a hobby. And Grote Reber was pretty interested in the findings that he was making. Using radio energy that he caught from space with that telescope, he actually created a map of our sky, of our galaxy, that was visible from Wheaton, Illinois. And he was the first person to do so. So that took him 20 years. And after 20 years, he finished up with his telescope. He actually dismantled his telescope piece by piece, drove it over here, and then reconstructed it where it stands today. And we keep it around as a historical monument. So he actually reconstructed it here in 1957 when our site was dedicated here. He hopped on board as one of our early researchers as well. So we're happy that Grote Reber was a friend of Green Bank, and he's actually considered to be the first radio astronomer ever. All right, next up, if you look out to the right, we have out in the field across the intersection a white antenna, and it's on 4 wheels on a track so it can spin around in circles. Now that antenna is a replica. Actually, that's not the original, and it was built by a fellow named Carl Jansky. Now we're going back to the 1920s, before Grote Reber. Jansky was hired by Bell Laboratories during the late 20s when they were putting in the transatlantic phone line, and they wanted him to find sources of static that could get into the phones and make them difficult to use. One of the sources of static he found was a hissing sound that was coming from outer space, and he figured out this was a cosmic radio wave, and that it was created somewhere in the Milky Way. So this was a completely new discovery at the time. He became the first person to discover the existence of cosmic radio waves. Although this wasn't too long after Orson Welles had published War of the Worlds. Everybody had this huge panic that there was an alien invasion, when really it turned out to be fiction, thankfully. But he wasn't about to open that can of worms again and scare everybody by saying he found real radio waves coming from outer space. They might have assumed that they came from aliens. So instead, he said that he found star noise coming from outer space. Good one, Jansky. Alright, so the building that's on our left has a bunch of blue panels, is the Jansky Lab. So the Jansky Lab, we named after Carl Jansky, of course, and that is where our 100 year-round employees have their offices. That includes astronomers, engineers, IT guys, computer operators, the telescope operators, anybody you might need to run a place like this. Let me also point out that we have a few flags on our left. We're passing a flag that's labeled with Earth, and we're coming up on a flag that says Mars. We've actually passed several of these flags already: the Sun, Mercury, Venus, and of course Earth, and now we're coming up to Mars. So these flags are constructed all along the road to give you an idea of how far apart the planets are from one another, and 1 foot on this scale model equals 3 billion feet in outer space. Pluto is 1.5 miles up the road from here, so we essentially took our solar system and squished it down to 1.5 miles. If we had a flag that represented the closest star to our solar system, it would be somewhere out in the Pacific Ocean, a little over 1,000 miles away. Alrighty, so at this time we're actually approaching the gates. That I'll have to ask you to double check your electronics at this time. Please make sure that those are powered off. That'll include pacemakers, smartwatches, smartphones, digital cameras. Just joking about pacemakers.
Wyłącz. To trudno. To trudno.
Alright, past the gates, we also only take diesel vehicles. On our right, we have a little anti-spark plug sign. It says diesel only. And that is because the spark plug in a gasoline engine will interfere with the telescopes the same way that electronics do. So only our approved diesels come back here. Alright, first up on the left, we have a 45-foot telescope. And pretty quick, a note on how these are named. 45 feet here actually describes the diameter